Hey everyone, welcome to Cloud on Air, live webinars from Google Cloud. We host webinars daily. My name is Sri Reddy. I'm a customer engineer with Google Cloud, and we'll be talking about Velostrata today, our cloud migration and workload mobility software. Today we are joined by Brian Cha, Solutions Architect with Velostrata. You can ask questions anytime on the platform, and we have Googlers on standby to answer them. But let's get started right away with the actual content. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Brian, I know customers are in various stages of their journey with cloud migration, migrating their workloads to the cloud. Can you talk a bit about first what challenges they face today?
Sure. So when it comes to migration, I think one of the key challenges that every customer, whether it's small or large enterprise, are challenged with data migration, right? So the data migration is really top of their mind, right? So because of, especially when you talk about enterprise, they have large amount of workloads, right? Thousands of workloads with hundreds of terabytes and petabytes for some customers. And how do you move those data efficiently with a limited pipe, right? Because they don't have the bandwidth, unlimited bandwidth. So looking at those data, how are you going to move those data efficiently? And then how do you mitigate those risks in terms of downtime, right? So I think every business today, whether internal, externally, they have some kind of SLA they need to meet. And during that SLA, there potentially financial impact, right? So the risk factor is very great. And then also when customers are moving data from on-prem or cloud to cloud, what tool do you use, right? Multiple tools, single tools, and there's different tools that are out there, right? So you have to choose the right tool. And then from a rollback perspective, everybody in enterprise, in case things go south, right?
Yeah, they want a backup plan.
Exactly. Right. What's my backup plan? And testing the backup plan alone takes months of effort to build, right? So those are some of the challenges that customers are facing today. Yep,
that sounds correct. So how does Velostrata help customers here?
Yeah, so kind of start with the Velostrata, with Google, right? So Google acquired Velostrata last year, June timeframe. So what we've been helping customers who really just some of the challenges that we talked about earlier, right, is purpose-built for really the migration in mind, right? Especially in a large-scale enterprise. And we talked about the number of VMs, workloads, upwards of thousands of hundreds of terabytes, of petabytes. How do you move those data, right? For us, we can move any size workload 10 minutes or less, regardless of size, right? So that's the key thing that we talk to our customer. Is that compelling to you, right? I'm sure it's compelling to most of the customers. And this is how we engage with some of our customers in different vertical, right? Whether it's healthcare, retails, and technology space, right? We have proven to win those deals and leverage our tool to migrate those applications to GCP.
Purpose-built enterprise-grade migration. What are some of the metrics that customers use today?
Sure. So the benefits are listed here, right? Some of the benefit. And if I talk about the time to operation we talked about, right? 10 minutes, we can move that workloads in on-prem or in the cloud, right? From other clouds to GCP in 10 minutes, right? So any size. That itself is compelling. The other compelling reason that we offer is also we can move back those applications in 10 minutes or less as well. So part of the rollback plans where things doesn't work out. So rather than extending the outage window for a period of time where they could be hours, days, some degrees, we can roll back pretty easily, right? And the other thing here is we can actually test before you migrate. So you take the risk out completely from that new to the cloud. We don't know the cloud. We're using our tool. We can validate those pretty easily. And the second thing is, I think this is interesting for a lot of the C-level folks, right? When you talk about the migration, there's a lot of labor goes into preparing and then get the readiness to validations and all those steps takes a lot of labor, right? So from our perspective, we are agentless. We don't install any agent, so that mitigate a lot of risk. Is it gonna, steal my resources? Is it gonna create a contention, right? Do I have to open a ports for every application, and then now you have to talk to security. Why do you need it? You have the explanation, you have the meeting. So all those unnecessary conversation, and this actual 5 hours per server came from our customer that migrated 6,000 VM to cloud, right?
6,000 VMs.
Yeah, yeah. So they actually gone through extensive exercise of figuring out, what is this, value for this application versus others, and for the tools they choose, right? So we are able to save 5 hours, 6,000 VMs, labor costs. You can do the math, right? It goes into millions and millions of dollars, just that alone saving. So that's another compelling reason that some of our customers choose our tool. And because way we approach things, right? We don't install agents. We can deploy and complete POC, right? POC meaning that we can move the application, validate everything works within 2 days, right? Well, a lot of times
That's
within a day, right,
yes.
that we can complete the POC. And because of how we approach things in terms of migration, right, we are able to save 5x compared to other tools on the marketplace.
Wow. Can you make this more real for us, Brian? Can you walk us through a customer example?
Sure. So here's kind of example that we use, right? This customer was really a stringent timeline to exit out of data center. As you know, customer doesn't want to pay, the cost on data center while you're running in GCP or any cloud for that matter. So you don't want to double pay, right?
Yes.
So you want to migrate quickly as possible. You don't want to renew any contracts, right? Because, vendors and data centers, they ties into a year or 2 years to get you best price. So from that perspective, a customer here, they had 700 VMs, about 140 terabytes of data, with limited bandwidth, 100 to 200 megabits of bandwidth that share between actual data sets. So how do you, leverage those for actual production data, right? And then also migration of that workload as well. From that aspect, we actually completed within time, even within 4 months, right? So, 2 months earlier than what they projected. And then you could see, how we compete or perform compared to other tools out there that we are actually, this is actual real world scenario, right? We actually data came from the customer environment that we are doing 5x, right?
Yes.
Compared to other tools they were previously using. If they were using that tool, they only migrated about 100 VMs out of it, right? Which isn't a whole lot versus their 700 VMs. So you can look at the timeline is going to be, very long time before you can do anything.
Very cool. So we're talking about agentless cloud migration at scale with minimal downtime. How does this actually work behind the scenes?
Yeah, so from an architecture standpoint, right, this is kind of where the meat and potato, right? So all the things that we talked about, how this is possible, right? We have customers that talked about, it's really magic, right? It's not really magic. There's a lot of effort that got into the product itself to make that possible, right? So when you're looking at the resources on the left-hand side of it, you have a physical machine. We were talking about the on-prem data center, right? And typically you have a hypervisor. We support VMware as the main hypervisor and the vCenter. So those are the only hypervisors that we support. In that, we deploy something called a Velostrata manager. It comes in the OVA format, which customers are pretty familiar with. We deploy that top of the customer's infrastructure, which is the red box right there, right? And that gets registered to the vCenter. From that point on, once it's registered, you really the 3-click, right? So go into the vCenter, select the VM, right-click. So really becomes a three-click operations. So customers' standpoint, there's no learning curve, right? It's very seamless in terms of executing migration. Is simply as a couple of right clicks, then your VMs are running it in GCP in 10 minutes or less.
So right now we support VMware. Do we have plans of supporting other cloud vendors and hypervisors?
Not at this point.
Okay.
Not at this point. But we do support other cloud, right, as well. AWS is other cloud that we support. So those are the two sources. So when you talk about the, what we do process, right? So in that regards, we also support the PowerShell as well, the alternate method, a RESTful API, and we also have a runbook. So in a large enterprise, we talked about when you have thousands of VM, right-clicking through is not possible, right? You're bound to make mistake. So we have a runbook that we can execute hundreds of VM migration at single click, right? So that's how we orchestrate the migration. And then some of the requirement that we should talk about here is also, what bandwidth do we require, right? So we require a 1 megabit per VM, every VM we migrate, right? So concurrency is the key here. So if you're migrating 100 VM from on-prem to GCP, you're looking at 100 megabit as a base, or the per VM, and then we require additional 20 megabit as a base. So you're looking at about 120 megabits overall, right? So that's the bandwidth requirement. And also, we write that data on the VPN or dedicated interconnect. So that's another requirement that we need to have as a part of the prerequisite. And then we encrypt all the way end to end, meaning that when data is in flight and transit at rest, we encrypt through all the way through.
So right from on-prem to the cloud, your data is encrypted.
Correct.
Completely. That's cool.
So that's kind of on-prem requirement. Once that is deployed, you're pretty much now define where you want to move your workload to. So this is where you look at the right-hand side, which is the red box there. That's something called cloud extension.
Okay.
The easy way to think of the cloud extension is a pair of devices that we deploy across the zone. So there's no single point of failure, because it literally is a storage array, right? So it handles all the read and writes while your applications are running in the cloud. For that matter, we also have tiering built onto the VM itself. So you leverage the memory SSD as a hot tier. So we store all the hot data, and then any cold data is going to store down to GCS bucket.
Okay.
Right. So that's kind of the requirement for on-prem and GCP. And once that is deployed, now we are ready to move actual workload.
Okay.
Right. So where we initiate the migration is really 3 steps. The first step we're going to talk about is compute migration.
Okay.
The second one we're going to talk about is storage migration, and then third one is detach. In this process, what we're doing is, as a first, right, we're going to talk about the compute first. We are streaming the compute with the agentless, right? So again, we don't install any agent, right? So with our 10 minutes into the installation, we can have the VM up and running in 10 minutes, right? Hour and 10 minutes. In that regards, we are taking the VM down on-prem. Obviously, we need to change control in there, right? And we'll take a snapshot, and the snapshots get mounted to the cloud extension over the WAN. And in that regards, what we're doing is essentially doing a WAN boot, right?
Okay.
In that period of 10 minutes, what we're doing is stream the blocks for operating system boot first, right? Into cloud extension. And then we'll stream the remaining blocks on the back end, right?
Okay.
So in 10 minutes, we'll have the application up and running. In that 10 minutes also, what we're doing is auto adaptation, meaning we're injecting networking driver. Obviously, the networking driver is different in GCP, right, than on-prem. So we install networking driver. We update the DNS, and also we install GCP guest agents, and then we do laundry list of things on the back end. So in 10 minutes, whether it's Windows VM or Linux VM, you get SSH into it, RDP into it, just like you did, right? That's a part of the adaptation. And then obviously the streaming compute happens, and this is where we are decoupling compute and storage and migrate the compute first. Easy ways to think of streaming is everybody's familiar with YouTube, right?
Yes, where you're streaming content,
Exactly, right? So you don't download any contents. And then for the music perspective, downloading musics are no more. Those are history, right? So you're on-demand caching or playing your music or movie contents or things like that. And those blocks at that point in time to play that music or movie stream to your devices on demandly, right? So essentially, that's what we're doing here in the first phase of the compute migration. And
then you can use the snapshot to roll back within the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, this is right on. So that's the next thing I'm going to jump into is safety net features.
Yeah.
So 10 minutes. We can move the workload, right? But the questions comes up, the risk factor, right? How do we roll back if things goes in our direction or as we plan? So we can actually roll back pretty easily within 5 to 10 minutes of a downtime. Again, we can roll back with all the changes while you're running in cloud as well. So we write every 5 gig or every hour. We'll write those to back on-prem. We consolidate it into the VMDKs. And we have a point in time to roll back to in case you need to roll back, right? So that's one of the first insurance policies that we have as a safety net.
Yeah, and it's very critical for enterprise customers.
Exactly. Yeah. Because of rollback plan, right? How do we roll back in case things goes not as planned? The second thing here is test clone, right? So before even going to migrate your production VM, customers are not going to sacrifice their production first, right? So what we do in that case, we ask, give us a few VMs, we can test migrate it, or let's take those, give me a set of the application we want to move. And then what we do is we take a running snapshot, right? While the production VM is up and running functional, we take a snapshot, we mount that snapshot just like what we did in the streaming compute phase, but we put that into isolated network, right? Meaning that any writes, any changes that you're doing in the environments is not going to replicate.
It's separate from your production environment. Yes.
So your VMs are production VMs or production workload application that continues to run. We can have the sandbox environment where customers are new to GCP or not sure about will it work in GCP, so they can do their validation, right? Is boots going to correctly? Is the application functional? Because we are on-demand caching, so this is not really meant for use for performance testing, things like that, but simply can give you kind of comfort that when we do move, because we've gone through the exercise of testing this application in multi-stage and different applications, we know and customers are aware of that they've seen it, right? This is actually going to work, so it gives them a comfort level.
Yeah.
So that's the first streaming compute part, right? Once that is done, now we're migrating storage, right? So I think we talked about compression deduplication earlier. We also leverage that compression deduplication from source all the way to target, right? So we only send the unique data. We store the unique data only, and then compress that. So we send less, store more in the cloud, right? So that obviously helps.
So data is encrypted, compressed, duplicated, and all this happens seamlessly in the background.
Correct. So kind of going back, I'm sure the customer is going to ask, 10 terabytes of my database, 10 minutes, that's not possible. Yeah, exactly. That's not possible. What we're doing is within that hour or two change control window, right? We look at and what the application requests, right? For the hot data, we'll stream those data first, right? And cache into that cloud extension within that hour or two window. So from that point on, all the data is in the cache, so there's no latency, right? But in cases where you need to grab the data that has been cached yet, what that happens looks like is we go back on-prem, read the data, that certain block, and read the block around it, and we stream those proactively in the background. So we might see the latency that period of time, but the second time around, we already
in the cache.
Yeah, that's how we mitigate those latency issues when it comes to large amount of data sets. So we migrate all the data, right? So, and then we want to get into fully cached state, meaning that every data we migrated are in the cloud, right? So therefore, now we can go into the next step, which is a detach process. Until the phase 2, we're booting our application through the cloud extension. But through the detach process, now we're specifying what storage, persistent SSDs or standard that you want to migrate to at the end. And then we're doing basically a boot swap from the cloud extension to actual persistent SSD or standard. That point on, we complete the migration. Now we can move on to next set of application in terms of migrating all your application from on-prem or other clouds to GCP.
So 3 steps: you stream the compute, you migrate your storage, and then you do the cutoff from your data center to the cloud. Okay, that sounds really compelling, Brian. Can you actually show us how this works? Can you walk us through a demo?
Yeah, so not like saving in action, right? So that really gets to close the gap in terms of how we work, right? And then the customer can see actually in action. So what you're looking at here is the vCenter environment. As you see, I have VM selected here, which is a Sugar CRM application. So if you look at the actual data content, it has 2 hard disks. One is 40 gig and the other one is terabyte there, right? So what we're going to do is initiate migration here. So because we have already installed the Velostrata manager and registered the plugin, we can right click on the VM. Now the Velostrata operation menu pops up, right?
Okay.
So easy as that, right? So now I'm going to choose the migration option here.
Okay. I see the test clone feature there too. Yes,
So for the demo perspective, we're gonna, we don't have much time, so we're gonna jump into actual show you kind of how we migrate end-to-end from a GUI perspective. So here's the wizard, right?
Yeah.
So now we're selecting what cloud extension do you want to use. So again, I mentioned that we can deploy cloud extension in different regions. So if you want to migrate your workload to different region, you can create different cloud extension and choose right cloud extension for that application and where you want to move that to, right?
Okay.
You select the VM name and click next.
Okay.
And what that's going to give you is selection of, what instance do you want to choose for that application. As you see here on the left-hand side on the top here, shows you what's been provisioned on-prem, right? It has 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of memory. But what we are seeing on the right is what actually observed usage. What that is really the right-sizing feature we have built into the product, where we're going to look at actual utilization, right? So back in the days when the hypervisor was getting born, a lot of people had concern about, the hypervisor overhead, things like that. So a lot of people over-provision.
Yes. Yeah.
So now things are a little bit different. People are not accustomed to the hypervisor. They're generally accepted very well. So you looking at utilization, and then you should looking at 10% and 1 gig of usage. So does it make sense when you're moving that workload from on-prem to GCP?
If you want to provision the same VM, right?
And same, right? Because TCO/ROI is the important thing here, right? So we can right size to right VMs by turning the monitoring on. And then this has been monitored for 5 days only. But what we want to have monitored for at least about 3 weeks, right, to cover the peak and valleys. And then you look at what's performance optimized costs. These are all list price, so price may vary, right? And then the cost optimized, right? So when you look at the observed usage, if you choose that, what my cost look like, and then I could select which project that you want to migrate to. In this case, I only have a one project because of demo environment, but customer could have host project and service project where they have shared VPC, where they want to move their certain application into a different shared VPC, right? In that case, you can select the project that way you want to migrate to, and then instance type, right? We also support custom instance type, as you see there, but you can actually pick any instances from a pull-down menu as well, right?
This is really useful. So we look at the on-prem usage over the critical period, and then we provide recommendations based on either cost or performance.
Exactly.
This is really useful.
So once that is instance is choose, now storage policy. I think this is safety net feature we talked about, right? Write back meaning that when you move your application to the cloud, while running in the cloud, if you need to roll back, or if you're trying to fix something in the fly, and do you want to extend your outage window, or do you want to quickly roll back, fix what the issue is, and then schedule on time, right? Because the change control window is critical for business, right? So we can roll back easily with all the changes in place, so you don't have to do manual syncing of data and so on and so forth. And then if you're talking about multi-tier application, how do you track which block has changed, which is touch, which is not touch? We do that for you, where we're gonna write those 5 gig every 5 gig or every hour. We'll write those back on-prem, so you have a point to roll back to in case you need to roll back. And I think a second safety feature, I think we talked about as well, which is test clone, right? Meaning the right isolation, meaning while you're running in cloud, right?
You want an isolated environment.
Isolated environment. So that way we don't write any changes that happen, right? Because you might be doing a code upgrade testing. You're simply just testing your application or function. So anything that's not production related, you don't want to write those changes back on-prem, right? So in that case, we can choose the right isolation option. And also, good use case here is customers haven't seen the GCP and what is how it works, right? So we can simply deploy our Velostrata Manager on-prem and then have it, VMs, whether it's 1 VM, 100 VM, up and running in GCP, matter of minutes. That's where the test clone comes in. So the next thing is choose the storage policy. So we're going to move into networking.
Okay.
So easy, right? So we don't provision any networking resources. So part of the prerequisite on GCP is you create subnet, firewall rules, all those things in place, and then we basically talk to that VPC and grab those informations assigned to the service account that we are leveraging. So you choose the subnet, right? You choose the right tag for the application, and then you choose DCP or reserve IP. Do you want to external IP, right?
Yeah.
And click next. And next thing you choose is, what storage, right? So it depends on the performance requirement for that application, right? You choose SSD or standard. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as a SSD.
And then if I don't need performance, I can choose standard.
Exactly, right? So depends on the application. And look at the summary, right? So do I have a right VM to start with, right? Because we have seen customers choosing wrong VMs, and they break this, application stack. So, choosing right VM, obviously, good start right there. Instance type, networking, right ports, right, or the tagging is applied, right storage is applied there, and then click finish, and that will initiate the migration. Simple as that. Now we can start migrating the workload from on-prem to GCP. So. For the time's sake, this is going to take about 10 minutes. So I have a kickstart the migration earlier with another copy of that same application here. So I'm going to jump into that application, which is this guy here, Sugar CIM application. And then if I scroll down, as you see, the disks are pretty much the same, right? Because I cloned it, 40 gig and terabytes. And then I'm going to go down here and look at what it's doing. So I kickstarted earlier, so it's doing storage migration, right? So not all the data has been migrated. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into actual RDP sessions here. Right?
So we provide a status of where we are in the migration at every step.
Yeah. So you look at 10.142, that 3.191 is the IP address. So I'm going to RDP, right, into that application, which is the 191, as you see.
So this is now running in the cloud.
Running in the cloud. And I can actually access the record right here, click. Even though data has been completely migrated, I can still RDP into it, obviously, right? I can access the application. I can edit, add, delete record, just like you do, right? And you're gonna be remaining in the states until all the migrations happens, and then you move on to the next set of applications. So I know this is kind of streamlined, short demo, but hopefully this kind of gives you an idea on how the migration happens through the GUI.
You've definitely highlighted how simple the whole process is. In a few clicks, you pick the compute, you set up your networking, pick your storage, and trigger the migration.
And obviously, this is for simple VM, but for a large-scale migration, we can leverage Runbook. So if there's definitely interest from a customer perspective, we can definitely go through the motion of POC demonstration as well. So hopefully, this has been valuable for you and then the audience here as well.
Yeah. No, Brian, this is definitely very interesting, especially because customers are in various stages of their cloud migration journey. If you had to summarize all of this, what's the take-home message for our audience today?
Yeah, so the take-home message is pretty simple, right? So what we talked about, how are we de-risking some of those, the risk, right? Outages, right? Long delay outages obviously is not going to be good for business and good for internal folks, right? Because you start losing a momentum and focus, right? They might think cloud is not right place to go. So how do you de-risk that? So we de-risk that by minimizing downtime, right? 10 minutes or less, we have the application up and running. And also de-risk by testing before actual migration of a production workload. Because now the application owner can see and play around with the resources and they can trust, right? Because it's functioned correctly, it's a seamless, the tooling perspective they're leveraged, it doesn't change, right? It's a pretty seamless. And then the WAN usage overall that we provide, the duplication compression, and then obviously scale, right? That's the big thing here, that we can migrate thousands of applications with a simple right click or the runbook, which helps migrating those applications from on-prem or other clouds to GCP pretty quickly.
That's cool. So agentless at-scale migration with minimal downtime.
Correct.
This is really, really cool. I hope all of you all found this session useful. Please stay tuned. We'll be back for live Q&A, and we'll be back in less than a minute. Welcome back. So looks like we have a few questions from the audience, so let's tackle them. First question, I'm not surprised. Brian, what are the hypervisors we support?
Yeah, so pretty simple, right? We got only one answer for that one. VMware is the only hypervisor we support. So we don't really have other Hyper-V or Xen support at this moment. So the VMware is a hard requirement along with the vCenter.
Okay. Second question, what applications do we support today for cloud migration?
Yeah, so we move data at the block level, so we don't really have any dependency from application, right? Okay. So it could be SAP, it could be SharePoint, it could be MySQL. It doesn't really matter, long as they're supported operating system, right? That's x86, obviously, because we depend on VMware, and then also if there is x86. On the physical server, we can also migrate that as well. So those are the the scenario. But again, we don't really have a dependency long as they're supporting operating system like Linux and the Windows, and then we have the actual release note stating the specific versions on our website as well.
Okay. Databases, they always come with their own quirks. How does this cloud migration software work with?
So again, kind of relate to the second question here because we move at the block level, so we don't really care if database or not, right? But obviously, for database, one unique thing that you need to aware of is we want to make sure that database shut down properly from a database layer perspective. So the whole service shut down at database level, and then we take from there, right? So I think this is no different than traditional what customers are doing today. Shut those applications down persistently, right? And then we execute the migration that standpoint. But again, we don't really care what the application is because we move at the block level.
Okay. So the next question seems related to the instances we pick when we are deploying the application in the cloud. Does it have to match the source, or does the customer have some leverage?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we show you, right sizing, right? So you don't really have to match. It really depends on, is customer environment, that particular application, is it running at underutilized, overutilized? That's where we look at right sizing to give you the kind of recommendation. We're not saying that's a hard requirement, but at least from a usage perspective, we maintain the overall usage for 3 weeks. During that time, we're giving that recommendation based on that, right? So we just want to make sure that cover the peak and valley first, right? And then choose the right instance. But if the workload changes in the cloud, if that needs to be done, and then you can actually do that after the post-migration. Okay.
So based on their recommendations, based on their usage, we provide recommendations, and the customer can pick based on cost or performance.
Yeah, and then if the workload changes, and they can go into bigger instances in the future. Good.
How much control do I have over the networking config? I know we saw a bit of that during the demo. It seemed like they have some control.
They have all the control. So we don't dictate what networking, how the networking should be laid out. Simply we write top of what the customer design, right, deployment look like. So we don't dictate anything. We will work with you. We need to understand what and that's where this is where the Cs could help. And we really write on top of what the customers are designed, right, in terms of networking, subnets, firewall rules, or projects, right, shared VPC or not. So customer have total control over it.
So this is probably where you want to spend some time at the beginning of your cloud migration project. What is my networking going to look like in the cloud?
Exactly. We have some cases where customer want to redeploy everything, so we're actually migrate something, so we have to roll back because they want to redo things, right? So it's essential, very critical to get that in place first, because without that, we can't really migrate anything, right? Because we don't really control the network, customer does, and then we write on top of that.
And they can always test it and roll back, so that's great. Okay. Last question. Can I use Velostrata to run my data center and cloud in parallel? Great question. Right.
Yeah, so this is a common question that we get. But we don't want to have two applications running in two different places, right? So we don't, right? We will initiate shutdown when we do a production migration. So there's always only one copy running, right? So whether it's on-prem or GCP. So when you initiate the migration, your production migration is happening, and within 10 minutes, that will be live in GCP.
In cloud, yeah.
So your VM on-prem is always remain shut down because we don't want to have another, instance up, and then that will cause an issue, right? And then from that VM instance on-prem, if you use the storage policy as a write back, then we'll write those changes back on-prem, so we can roll back in that case. But the short answer is no. The only one copy is always running.
Okay, sounds good. Well, that's all we had in terms of questions. Thank you for joining us today. We wish this was useful. We hope this was useful, and we wish you good luck in your cloud migration journey. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for our next webinar, Ask the Expert. Thank you.